Good morning, one and all. My name is Leah from Project Revolution, and you can find me at www.barleycounselling.com. A lot of the work that I do is with clients who have suffered from trauma or abuse, or certainly have witnessed or experienced it. Maybe you grew up in quite a volatile household and that became your norm. Maybe you experienced it personally through a marriage or relationship, or even from a sibling or friend. Maybe you were bullied at school. Maybe you experienced something that you were a victim of crime within. Whatever that is, my clients come to me and say, even though I'm no longer living in that environment, even though I know that I'm generally safe, my life really feels unsafe, and I'm finding that I am reacting and having adverse reactions to seemingly quite small situations. Now, what that does to a client is makes them feel completely defeated and hopeless about the situation. Firstly, because they don't know why they're acting in such a way. And so you find a lot of self-judgment and condemnation going on about, I shouldn't be reacting like this. What's the matter with me? Well, I'm here to tell you that triggers and trauma responding is a very real part of your experiences that you cannot help. I want to explain to you firstly how trauma impacts a person. So say, for example, you grew up in quite a volatile household and you were used to really not being able to feel safe. You didn't quite know where dad was from day to day, and so you walked on eggshells, and perhaps you witnessed or experienced personally some kind of physical or emotional or mental abuse. What that does to the actual brain, and this has been clinically researched and scientifically researched to be straight, is that it affects all parts of your brain and nervous system in this way. The amygdala, which is essentially your response, which is your kind of like detector, so to speak. That's there to help you to be able to pick out or to detect when something is dangerous or is going to harm you in some way. Now, if you've experienced trauma and you've had to essentially strengthen that muscle, that's going to mean that yours is far stronger and more sensitive than somebody who has not witnessed that. Much like if you were to go to the gym and just train your right arm, somebody who's experienced trauma has had to train their amygdala, or rather the brain has trained and strengthened the amygdala, because it's there to serve you, it's there to protect you. So if you're in an environment where you are unsafe, where there is danger, it needs to do its job. Secondly, what that affects is the hippocampus. Now, the hippocampus is responsible for your memories, for your experiences. Essentially, because of all the chemicals that have flooded through your system when you have been freeze, fight or flighting as a result of trauma or anxiety or experienced stressful situations, these chemicals have actually eradicated certain cells within your hippocampus, therefore making it less effective. Now, what that means in an adult world, as you've been experiencing traumatic situation, is bearing in mind the amygdala is now stronger, so it's looking out, it's what we call hypervigilant, looking out for threats, and that talks to the hippocampus. So say, for example, you walk outside and you see somebody who looks exactly like an abusive person that you used to be with. The hippocampus, because it's shrunk, because it's not as effective as somebody who hasn't experienced that, the hippocampus will send an alert signal, and the hippocampus will not be as good as being able to distinguish between your actual memories and your experiences and what is happening today in real life. In other words, separating you from the past. We call this a flashback, and you will have flashbacks as a direct response of the stimuli that the amygdala has picked up. Now, then we move into the prefrontal cortex. Now, the prefrontal cortex is what's known as your rational mind. It's the part that is responsible for, logical thinking, reasoning, calming, self-soothing, kind of mindful, conscious ways of being, but it's very small. Okay? And again, if you have experienced trauma and your brain has consistently been in a state of freeze, fight, or flight, your prefrontal cortex shrinks. Why? Because it's not been used as much. There hasn't been much room for logical, self-soothing thinking or reasoning. It's been consistently protecting. That's what's been the main focus and main basis of your brain. And so it will adjust accordingly. The brain is a brilliant thing. It will acclimatize itself to know what functions you need the most. But of course, when you're in an adult world where that is no longer your part, it's not self-serving. So the point of the prefrontal cortex being shrunk means that it is less likely and less capable of being able to talk you out of the flashback and the fear and the anxiety that is coming up as a result of the stimuli that's been acted by the amygdala. Now, all of this combined together, the inability to self-soothe and regulate, the stimuli that literally creates an instant flooding of adrenaline and cortisol, the brain that processes straight away, which compounds the experience and gives you all the physical symptoms of a previous experience that is being triggered by what's in front of you today. That alerts your nervous system into a complete state of alert. You are less likely and less prone to be being able to be in what's known as the regulated state. Because your body, your brain has primed itself. It knows that this life of yours is full of worry and concern and anxiety, and it wants to look after you. But it doesn't work today when you're living in a nice relationship, where you are no longer surrounded by people who are abusive, where you are no longer having to walk on eggshells. But of course, your system is still going to respond the same way. But here's the good news. Neuroplasticity, which is exactly what I do, helps you to retrain the brain. The same way that your brain has been trained into thinking and feeling and acting in this way, you can reverse it. Much like I said about the pumping iron with the right arm, of course this arm's going to get really strong. We can learn to pump the left arm. And how we do that, how I do that with my clients, is helping them to work with their triggers. In other words, every time you get an adverse reaction or a flood of feelings to a situation that is happening in your life, I help you to be able to come back to self and work with what that is bringing up. In other words, when you, for example, get out a pen and paper, so say, for example, your boyfriend hasn't called you, you were previously in an abusive relationship where he just completely and utterly ignored your needs, dismissed you, rejected you, perhaps even abused you, but you're with somebody else who is not like that at all. But an action creates a similar response to how you felt in your previous relationship. We have a two-stroke kind of dynamic that I help clients to work through. And number one, we have to go back to the scene of the original kind of wound. Okay. We have to allow our clients to be able to process and be validated and to release those suppressed and stored emotions and those experiences that went in that time. Chances are most people, when they have gone through abusive or traumatic experiences, have not had the opportunity to be able to talk it out, to be able to process what went on, to be able to look at it from different perspectives and gain some further deeper clarity, to have some tools to be able to self-forgive or to start talking to self compassionately a little bit. So we always deal with that component there. But also we work with present day. within trigger situations. And the strategy I teach my clients is to consistently, and you may have to do this 15, 20 times a day in the beginning, because like any skill, it takes consistency and determination, and it feels a little bit cranky. You know, much like anything when you're learning it, until you've done it a few times, until you could embody it, it's going to feel out of your comfort zone and almost like a bit of a waste of time, right? You know, like, there's going to be some resistance, but I help and I encourage my clients to work through that resistance, because essentially what you want to start doing is you want to start training your amygdala. You want to start training your prefrontal cortex and your hippocampus, and allow yourself to turn off the sympathetic response, which is the freeze, fight, flight, the mad thoughts, the incredible feelings, the bodily functions, the either stay or fight or want to run away. We do that by being able to slow the client down, to take a pen and paper, which automatically switches on the prefrontal cortex that, remember, is not as capable yet as somebody who's not experienced this stuff. But activating a pen, getting a pen and paper and writing out what has just come up for you, how you feel, instantly sends a signal to the parasympathetic response to stop turning off all these alert and danger and anxiety signals. You are in a position then to be able to self-soothe. I ask my clients, ask yourself these questions. Okay, what am I feeling? What has that brought up for me? When do I remember a time and place where that was familiar for me? What was that like back then? What did I need back then but didn't get? What do I need right now? How can I give that to myself right now? And that might be, you know, just to be able to talk to a friend, go out and do something nice for yourself, maybe just take a load off and breathe. But we help clients to work with essentially their own machinery, to be able to turn off that emergency pull switch and turn on that it's okay, I'm feeling this way, but I know how to turn the emergency button off. It's been a false alarm. I can tell the police it's okay, I'm not quite sure why the alarm went off, but everything appears to be safe here. Thank you for your concern. And do opposite behaviour therapy, because you see, essentially what happens is when people get triggered, they will react in a certain way. And all that does is feeds the beast. All that does is tells the brain to keep doing what it's doing, keep producing what you're doing, because you're absolutely right. Yes, you're in danger because you've acted in a way that is either frozen, i.e. avoidance, fighting, i.e. aggressively. Sorry, I got that wrong. Flight, that's avoidance. Freeze, which is just shut down, completely stonewall. Go insular and perhaps beat self up. If you're acting in all of those ways or one of those ways, you are getting into a dance and being what the brain thinks you are. So it's about slowing down, recognizing where originally this came from, switching on your prefrontal cortex, asking yourself some questions so you can regulate and distinguish fact from fiction, past from present. And then you allow yourself to do the next right thing. Not the next reactive thing, but the next right thing. Whatever the opposite is of what you would normally do, enables you to absolutely tell your entire system, you see, I'm safe. This is not the same. You've also given a voice to your past and allowed another layer of healing to happen. It's a beautiful combination, and the best thing about this is, the more you keep doing this, guess what happens? The stronger your muscles become, the less that you will fall into trigger situations. Everything dies down. Everything quietens down the more you do it. So do yourself a favour today. Stop for a minute. Ask yourself, why am I feeling or reacting in this way? Take a time out and sit. Do nothing, just take a time out and ask yourself, what am I feeling? Where is this coming from? What does it remind me of? How is this not the same as then? When you've got yourself into that place of regulation, you can honestly look objectively and ask yourself, what do I need to do here? What is my next right move? You'll find your answers.